I'm delighted today to introduce Dr. Royd, who accepted our invitation. I had heard Dr. Royd talk on this topic at the International Master Gardener meeting last summer. And it's truly an interesting topic, and she is a great speaker. Dr. Royd is very well trained. She has a PhD from the University of Maryland. She did a fellowship at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda. She was on the faculty at George Mason University for many years before her retirement from academia. She's a master gardener in Northern Virginia, and she's associated with the Green Spring Gardens. In fact, she has left some pamphlets about their garden up here on the table in the front. So pick those up and get some inspiration there. And so she brings a lot of expertise, and she's one of us as a master gardener. So really appreciate that as well. But this topic is really interesting, and I'd like her to get right down to business. So I would like you to welcome Dr. Royd to our meeting today. Thank you.
Okay, let me just. Okay, so my talk today is sponsored then by the Virginia Cooperative Extension, and it's supported by Green Spring Gardens and the Fairfax County Park Authority. So I am a Green Spring Garden Master Gardener. Green Spring Gardens is a wonderful 33-acre park in Fairfax County. If you are ever up there in the Washington area, please come and visit us. I brought some brochures that are on the table describing our lovely park. So with that, then, this is the mission of my program. We are volunteers in partnership with Green Spring Gardens and GCE, dedicated to working through community outreach to educate and promote environmentally sound horticulture practices. And this is the Eco-Savvy Gardening logo of my group. It symbolizes our philosophy of gardening, which of course is to garden in a very environmentally friendly manner. So with that then, to introduce the topic I'm talking about today, I have this cartoon, this comic strip from Peanuts, classic Peanuts. And I don't know if the newspapers in this area then carry classic Peanuts, but the Washington Post does. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Post ran several comic strips showing Linus trying to train Snoopy to sniff out truffles in the soil. So here, Linus is saying, keep sniffing, Snoopy. If you smell a truffle, point to where it is, and I will dig it up. So Snoopy says, my nose isn't used to all this work, sniff, sniff, sniff. I wonder if you can strain a nose muscle. So I'm showing this to you to introduce you to my topic and to tell you that truffles play a major role in what I'm going to talk about today. So a truffle, then, as we see in this slide, is very similar to a mushroom, in that they both are classified with the fungi, and they both are the fruiting bodies of fungi, meaning they contain the spores then of the organism. We know that a mushroom grows on top of the soil, and truffles grow within the soil, typically of beech and oak trees. Well, humans have known about truffles for hundreds of years. And traditionally, truffles have been located then by being sniffed in the ground by pigs or by trained dogs. And people have known for many years that truffles are a real delicacy. I went online last week and found out that a certain white truffle today in Europe sells for $6,000 a pound. So knowing then that truffles had value, in 1885, the German government hired a botanist, Dr. Albert Frank, to try to find a better way to propagate truffles, either in the ground or better yet, in the laboratory. So Dr. Frank never did find a better way to propagate truffles. I guess Mother Nature knew what she's doing. But when he was doing his investigation in the trenches, he realized that there was this firm relationship between the roots of plants and certain fungi in the soil. And others had noted this, but Dr. Frank took his observations one step further, and he concluded then that this was a very firm relationship, and that the roots of the plants were feeding the fungi, and the fungi were feeding something in return to the plants. And he called this relationship then the mycorrhiza. Myco refers to fungi. Okay, mycology is the study of the fungi. Rhiza refers to roots. So the word means fungal root, but that's not the definition of the word. The definition of the word here is a symbiotic relationship between plant roots and fungi. And more specifically, it's a mutualistic symbiotic relationship in that both partners benefit. The plant benefits and the fungi benefit. And also, while I'm saying this, let me tell you too that the word does not need two R's, but it has two R's, and that's what we have to deal with. Okay, so today then I'm going to talk about the structure of fungi, so you can see how they do what they do. I'll talk to you about the three types of fungi, the major types of fungi in the soil, and then something about the soil food web for various reasons. If for no other one, to, of course, remind you that the soil has many, many other organisms in it, in addition to these fungi. Then we'll talk about plant nutrients and decomposition. I'll say something about photosynthesis. And then I'll talk more specifically about the mycorrhizal fungi, descriptions, functions, and their diversity. And finally, we'll apply all of this to everyday gardening, our interest. So again, mycology is the study of the fungi. And this is a very important point. Fungi are not photosynthetic. Okay, I'm going to talk more about photosynthesis in a few minutes, but they're not photosynthetic. Green plants are photosynthetic, and we know what they do, right? They pull carbon dioxide out of the air, and they fix the carbon into sugar, glucose, which is a carbon-containing compound. And from that glucose, then, green plants make all the other macromolecules then that the plant needs to survive. And you've heard of them all. It makes more carbohydrates, it makes proteins, it makes nucleic acids, and it makes lipids. So all of these macromolecules then are carbon containing. So when I mention organic compounds today, I'll be talking then about these carbon containing compounds. Also, the fungi are typically divided into three groups. The single-celled yeast, I'm not going to talk about those today. And then the multicellular filamentous molds and the multicellular filamentous mushrooms and truffles and puffballs and other structures like that. So multicellular, of course, means that the organism consists of more than one cell. Filamentous means that these cells are arranged then in a filament or a long chain. This picture was taken through a bright field microscope. It was magnified at about 400 times. And what we're seeing then are hyphae. I'm going to show everyone. But each one of these single strands then is a hypha. A plural then is hyphae. We cannot see a hyphae or a hypha or a few hyphae with the unaided eye. They are microscopic. But if we have hundreds and thousands of hyphae coming together, we have a mycelium. And we can see mycelia if it's big enough. If you've ever turned over a compost pile and you see a lot of white strands, you're looking at the mycelium then of fungi growing in that compost. Now, like plant cells, fungal cells have a rigid cell wall. And between each of the cells, this is going to show, between each of the cells, between each of these cells then is a rigid cell wall. But the wall between the cells is not complete. It's porous. It has holes in it. So what that means then is what's in this cell could go through those pores into this cell. They could go through these pores into this cell and so forth. And it can go in the other direction as well. It could go from, for instance, this cell through the holes in this wall to this cell to this cell. So we call these then non-septate hyphae. And we also call this process then cytoplasmic streaming. Also, this photo then of fungi are showing you spores. Again, spores are reproductive bodies of fungi. They're analogous to seeds of plants. If these spores break off and fall into a favorable environment, they can germinate and form more hyphae and then another filamentous mold or mushroom. I also want to say one more thing about this while it's up here. If this fungus is growing in the soil, that these fungi are known for secreting degradative enzymes that go into the soil and break down large organic molecules. So they break down large organic molecules, and then they can take in some of these smaller molecules. They can absorb them then through their wall and through their membrane. And I just put this slide in just to make you realize that fungi form a network, okay? They're not just in two directions, they're in three directions and just form this large network. Well, we all know what this is, a mushroom. So this is a multicellular filamentous mushroom. And again, truffles are fruiting bodies of fungi, just like this mushroom is. And I was very happy and somewhat surprised when I put this talk together to find this. This is a cross-section, of a schematic cross-section then of a mushroom. And a mushroom, as it turns out, consists of tightly packed mycelia. The stem consists of tightly packed hyphae or mycelia. The cap consists of that, and we see then that the spores are hanging down then from the cap. And the mycelia, the hyphae forming then more mycelia, go into the ground and really like serve as the roots then of the mushroom. So there are three categories then of fungi in the soil. There's saprophytic fungi, which are those that degrade dead material. If you've ever walked in the woods and you see an old dead tree, you might see mold or mushrooms growing on it. Those are saprophytic fungi. And then there are pathogenic fungi. As master gardeners, we know that a lot of plant diseases are caused by fungi. And then the mycorrhizal fungi. And again, that is what I will talk about today. These are the fungi that form the symbiotic relationships with the roots of plants. The next slide shows the soil food web, the prototypical soil food web as published by the USDA with a slight modification by me. So what we see is this. We have dead organic matter down here on the left. This could be the leaves that you raked last year, you put them on your compost pile. Could be grass cuttings. You didn't leave it on the soil, you put it in the compost pile, or this can happen on the soil as well. So what happens in the soil food web? What it is, it's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that recycles nutrients. So what happens is that typically the small fungi and bacteria, which are just single-celled microorganisms, again, they too secrete enzymes. They start breaking up the larger molecules in the organic matter, and they ingest some of this. So now some of the nutrients are being given to these microorganisms. Then larger microorganisms eat the smaller ones. The protozoa, the nematodes, the earthworms eat the smaller organisms. So the nutrients then go to a higher level. And finally, even larger organisms, arthropods, birds, moles, voles, will eat those other organisms. And what happens then is that these animals can defecate onto the soil, and they have recycled, this whole ecosystem has recycled the nutrients in this organic matter of dead grass or dead leaves. And what's happening is that this dead organic matter has a lot of nutrients in it, but they're not in a form that the plants can use. So it's the job of the soil food web to put those nutrients into a form that plants can use. So these animals defecate then, and the nutrients of the organic matter then is put into a form then that the plants can use. So what nutrients am I talking about? We can divide the nutrients into 3 categories. The free nutrients, the carbon from the atmosphere, hydrogen and oxygen from water. And then we have macronutrients. Again, terrible terminology. Macro means big. These aren't big nutrients, but these are nutrients needed in relatively large quantities. And we know nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, as well as calcium, sulfur, and magnesium are needed in relatively large amounts. And then micronutrients are not small little nutrients, but they're needed then in smaller amounts, like iron, boron, manganese, and others. We sometimes call these trace elements. So these are the nutrients that plants need. Or the whole picture looks like this. We have our dead organic matter, the leaves from last autumn, and SFW stands for soil food web. So the soil food web goes to work on this dead organic matter, and ultimately we get compost, which is partially decomposed organic matter. And now what's happening is that these macro and micronutrients that the plants need are getting to be exposed. Meanwhile, degradation goes on, decomposition goes on by the soil food web, and we get humus, which we all know is the end of the line of decomposition. And with that, then these macro and micronutrients are released and they're made available for the plants to use. So the next question we have to ask is, how do the plants get the macro and the micronutrients? Animals, of course, can walk or run, or they can swim to get their foods, but plants are stationary, okay? They can't walk to get their food. The food has to come to them. So the food comes to the plants either through their roots or through the mycorrhizal fungi. Okay. Now, photosynthesis. If I were going to talk about photosynthesis at George Mason University, I'd hear the moans in the class. Oh my God, we have to learn photosynthesis again. But this is very simple, okay? You know that green plants undergo photosynthesis. So what happens is that the plants take in carbon dioxide from the air, and let's remember what we have too much of today, right? Too much carbon dioxide in the air. They take up water through their roots, and with the energy from the sun, they fix, this is the word that's used, they fix the carbon of carbon dioxide then into glucose, which is a 6-carbon sugar. And with that, then oxygen is released. Well, what does a plant do with all that glucose? As I mentioned previously, the plant uses that glucose now to make all of its other carbon-containing compounds for itself, for it to grow and to survive in its environment. But the plants do something else. This is amazing. I didn't know this until I put this talk together even. The plants secrete up to 25% of these organic molecules, amino acids, proteins, fats. They secrete up to a quarter of that through their roots. Some of it just goes into the rhizosphere, okay, the soil that the roots are in, and others of it instead then go to the mycorrhizal fungi. Amazing, isn't it? I think. So some terminology. The mycorrhiza, as I mentioned before, is the mutualistic symbiotic relationship between the root of a plant and a fungus. And there's two sides to this then. The fungus is called the mycorrhizal fungus, and the plant is called then the mycorrhizal plant. And I bring this to your attention because the word mycorrhizae is misused. It's misused in the popular literature, and it's misused even in the scientific literature. But this is the proper terminology. Now, so what is happening then is that the roots of the plants are feeding organic compounds made following photosynthesis. They're feeding these organic compounds to the fungi in the soil, and the fungi in the soil are in return feeding nutrients then to the plant. So what's this doing? It's preventing nutrient stress. What a major benefit to the plants then is that nutrient stress is somewhat relieved. And I have to tell you too that this is basically true if you read a lot about this in nutrient poor soil. I hesitate to say that, but I feel as though I have to say that. If a plant has everything right by it, why does it need fungi? But then you have to ask yourself, what's the definition of nutrient poor soil? But I have to say that. Okay, so anyway, plants and fungi have co-evolved for over 400 million years. They co-evolved 400 million years ago. So this is a very well established symbiotic relationship. And it's found in over 80% of all natural systems. And this is what it looks like. So in this next series of slides, I chose to have a tree. It doesn't have to be a tree. All plants then will form these relationships with fungi. It can be a plant, it can be a tree, a shrub, it can be a fern, it can be a perennial, it can be vegetables, it can be certain grasses. All plants have these relationships then with the fungi. So what's happening here then is we have our tree with the roots, and the red triangle, rectangle is indicating a fungal cell. We know it's way out of proportion. We know that fungal cells then are microscopic. And what happens then is that many of these filaments of fungi then attach to the roots of a plant. And as you see, what are they? They're really extensions of the roots of plants. And these filaments are much smaller than are the smallest roots of plants. I've read that these can be 1/60th, 1/60, making them much smaller than the roots, meaning then that they can go into pores in the soil, and they just extend further out than do the roots then of the plants. Now, when they are out there, the fungi can secrete enzymes, break down organic molecules in the soil, and take up the macro and the micronutrients like phosphate. So the phosphate then goes through that non-septate hyphae, and it's delivered then to the roots of plants. Not only that, but some of these fungi can pick up water, okay, and deliver water to the roots of the plants, making the plants then be somewhat drought tolerant. What does this mean to us as gardeners? If you have a good mycorrhizal network, fungal network in your property, and your neighbor does too, what it means is when your neighbor waters her perennial garden, she's watering your perennial garden. And so when you go on vacation, you don't say, could you water my tomatoes? You just say, water your tomatoes when I'm done. Thank you. Okay, so we're beginning to see the advantages of all of this to us as gardeners. Okay, but trees and plants do not live by themselves. They live with other plants. So what happens then is one fungus can connect many plants. And actually carbon-containing compounds can go from one plant to another plant. My husband and I like to go hiking over in the Shenandoah Park once in a while, and we're walking in the woods and I see this little tree 3 or 4 feet high. And I look up, there's a huge canopy. The tree is essentially growing in the shade. And I say to myself, how can that little tree get enough sunlight to undergo photosynthesis, to make glucose, to make all the carbon-containing compounds it needs? Well, what's happening is that the big trees are feeding the little trees. Isn't that really amazing? On the reference list that Bill sent you is the reference for a book by Dr. Suzanne Simard. It's just coming off the bestseller list. Dr. Simard is a forest ecologist in Canada. She has spent her whole career studying this. And not only, she calls these mother trees or hub trees that pass food onto their offspring, their saplings. But she has also shown that a tree can pass carbon-containing molecules onto another species. Dr. Simard has shown that birch trees can pass organic molecules onto fir trees. So it's a really good book. Now, let's see. I put this slide in to let you know what mushrooms and also truffles do as well. So here we have a conifer with mushrooms growing on the ground. And remember, the roots of mushrooms are mycelia. So these mycelia go into the soil and they can be picking up macro and micronutrients in the soil and feeding it then to the roots of the plant. And meanwhile, mushrooms, remember, cannot make their own carbon-containing compounds. The tree is feeding carbon-containing compounds to the mushrooms. So the same is true of truffles. And this is a cartoon I found online, which I particularly like. Over on the right, we have mushrooms growing on dead wood. These are the saprophytes. And over here on the left, we have parasitic or pathogenic fungi growing on the stem of a plant. And then to the right of the green plant, you see mushrooms, then from mycorrhizal fungi. And the roots of those mushrooms, the mycelia, go to the roots of the green plant. They go to the roots of the small plant in the middle, and they go to the roots of the larger trees on the right. What's here in red is a truffle, and truffles are the same way. The mycelia from a truffle goes to the roots then of each of the 3 plants. And also, the smaller tree then needs some help in its growth. So its roots then go to, this is hard to see, but its roots then go to fungi, then that link up to the larger tree. So the small tree can get some carbon-containing compounds. And also in this cartoon, we see on the right and the left here, mycorrhizal helper bacteria. We know that the soil is full of bacteria, and there are bacteria that play a role in all of this. We don't know an awful lot about it yet as to what they do. So what is this like? For those of you who have visited us in metropolitan Washington, D.C., you know what this is. This is a map of the subway system, the metro. And we know that out in suburbs, the tracks and the stations are above ground. But the rule is once the trains get in the city, everything is underground. So we have the red line, the blue line, the orange line, Washington's metro system. We can make an analogy between the mycorrhizal fungi and the whole mycorrhizae then to a subway system. We know in a subway system, the trains run on the tracks, they run in both ways. In the hyphae then of the fungi, the nutrients can run in 2 ways. The stations here then are somewhat analogous then to plants, and that all the stations in a metro system are connected. The station at the top of the red line is connected way down here to the station at the bottom of the blue line. So just the way trees and plants then in an ecosystem are connected together. So the next time you're in the woods and standing in the woods, think about what's happening under your feet. It's really a very, very busy place. Okay, there are 7 types of mycorrhizae, and they differ by the fungi involved, they differ by the host plants, and they differ by the morphology of the interface, which is what does it look like when the fungus hits the root of the plant? But most of the relationships are in 2 categories. One's called the ectomycorrhizal fungi, or the ectomycorrhizae, and the endomycorrhizae, which is also called the arbuscular mycorrhizae. And so diagrammatically, it looks something like this. This whole structure is representing the root of a plant. And on the right, then we see the ectomycorrhizae. So what happens is that the fungus approaches the root of the plant and it wraps itself around the root of the plant, going back to here. All this white on the smaller roots is mycorrhizal fungi. Another advantage of this immediately is that the physical presence of that is preventing certain diseases of the plant. It prevents pathogenic fungi from attacking those roots. It prevents nematodes and bacteria from causing disease then on those roots. So some of the cells instead then go between the cells of the root. This is called a Hartig net, and this is where the exchange of nutrients occurs. On the right-hand side, we see arbuscular mycorrhizal, an arbuscular mycorrhizae relationship. These fungi do not wrap around the root of the plant. They go in between the cells of the root. And ultimately, what will happen is that the wall of the fungus will somewhat fuse with the wall of the cell, and the membrane of the fungus then pushes in and causes the membrane of the plant cell then to invaginate, forming these tree-like structures. So those are the 2 major types then of ectomycorrhizal fungi. So here, these are 2 pictures taken from the USDA's webpage. In the left one, we see the roots of some plants, and the white then is the ectomycorrhizal fungi. What we see then on the right is the L-shaped structures of the root of the plant, and we're seeing these long filaments coming off the root. So for the ectomycorrhizal fungi, they're found in about 10% of plant families. There are about about 6,000 species of fungi that do this. And they are in the phyla Ascomycota or Basidiomycota, and this is then where the truffles and the mushrooms are. And many of these are highly specific, meaning that they will only go to a specific tree, a specific species. And others are generalists in that they will go to many different species. So the ectomycorrhizal fungi then are found on most pine trees, spruces, firs, hemlocks, and some deciduous trees like beech trees and oak trees, where Snoopy should be sniffing. The endomycorrhizal fungi sort of looks like this through a microscope. We're seeing this square type structure in the bottom half of the slide. And what we're looking at then is one of those arbuscules, one of those tree-like structures inside of the cell. So the AM fungi were the first to evolve over 400 million years ago. There aren't as many species. There's only a few hundred species of these. And these do not produce fruiting bodies like mushrooms or truffles. About 90% of plant families contain these fungi. So these are the most common ones. These can make up about 50% of all the organisms in soil. And these are typically generalists. They'll go to any plant. Now, I'm just going to take a few minutes here to, let me say this. So the AM fungi then colonize perennial grasses, not annual grasses. They colonize then annuals, perennials, shrubs, cover crops, some vegetables, not all vegetables, and some trees. And most of these fungi are in the phylum Zygomycota in the genus Glomalin. And these organisms serve a major role in good soil structure. They synthesize and secrete a molecule that's called glomalin. So glomalin is a glycoprotein. So it's a protein, has a lot of sugar moieties around it. And it's synthesized then by members of the genus Glomalin. So what happens here, we're seeing, again, the filaments of a fungus in this photo. It was stained in such a way to pick up the glomalin. So the fungi synthesize glomalin, they secrete it, and it adheres to the walls, the outside then of the fungi, and we think stabilize it. Well, fungi don't live forever, and when they die, the glomalin sloughs off and it goes into the soil. So a major source of carbon in the soil. And what it does is it stabilizes aggregates in the soil. It's often referred to as a biological glue. But a major job of the glomalin is that it serves as a carbon sink. Glomalin in the soil can stay there for up to 42 years. And let's not forget where the carbon came from, right? The carbon came from the atmosphere. A green plant took in carbon dioxide, fixed it into sugars. The green plant then made other carbon-containing compounds that ultimately were excreted in the exudate. The fungus picked it up, synthesized glomalin, and left it in the soil. So what do we have too much of today? Too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We should all go home this afternoon and plant a tree. So the benefits of glomalin are these: it improves soil structure, it holds soil aggregates together, it increases soil stability, it stores carbon by protecting organic matter from decomposition, and it gives soil its workability, its tilth. So some facts, general facts about the mycorrhizae. About 70 or up to 90% of plants are mycorrhizal. Some are obligatory, meaning they have to have mycorrhizal fungi or else they won't grow. We all know about the Indian pike. It's white, does not undergo photosynthesis. It has to have mycorrhizal fungi feed it carbon. Have you ever, I'm sure we have all heard, when we're transplanting a plant, take some of the soil. What are we taking? We do that because we're taking mycorrhizal fungi. So that's what you have to do if you're transplanting, but you should be transplanting this from the wild anyway. Other plants are facultative. If the fungi are there, they'll use them and grow better than they will if the fungi are not there. But a plant can still grow. And some are non-mycorrhizal. They just do not use the mycorrhizal fungi. An example then are some vegetables like cabbage and broccoli do not use mycorrhizal fungi. Okay, now, so over 200,000 plant species have mycorrhizal fungi. One fungus can associate them with many plants. Think of our subway system. And one plant can have many, many species of mycorrhizal fungi. And you might say, why that? Why do they need so many? Because fungi are not created equally. They have different functions. Well, first of all, let me say that plants can have only ectomycorrhizal fungi, or they can have only endomycorrhizal fungi, or they can have both. And young plants may have different fungi than older plants have. The fungi might differ with the time of year, with warm summer and cold winters. Soil type determines mycorrhizal fungi. But typically fungi often have different functions. Some fungi deliver phosphate better, some deliver water better. So a tree or any plant then often has many more than one fungus. It's been shown that one tree, for instance, if I can find it, has over 2,000, a Douglas fir tree, has over 2,000 different mycorrhizal fungi associated with its roots. And there's not time to talk about this today, but mycorrhizal fungi promote plant richness. It promotes diversity of plants in a particular area. That's a whole other topic. Okay, where are the fungi? They're in the topsoil. Okay, so what affects the mycorrhizal fungi? Anything that affects the topsoil. Tilling, you break up the mycorrhizal fungi. We don't till today. Fire, okay, the heat kills the mycorrhizal fungi. Erosion washes topsoil away, washes the fungi away. Fumigation, strip mines, compaction, and synthetic fertilizers. Okay, synthetic fertilizers are salts. And what they do is they draw water out of their environment. If there are organisms in the environment, they draw water out of the organisms and they prevent the replication of organisms. They might kill the organisms. So you should really not be using synthetic fertilizer. How do fungi travel? By the wind, by animals, by topsoil, by compost, by hikers' boots, by machinery that digs in the soil, and by the soil of plants. In a big box store, you can buy mycorrhizal fungi today. And it is available. It became available in the 1990s. It's used routinely in agriculture, arboriculture, and horticulture, and we can use it in our own gardens if we so choose. So mycorrhizal fungi at work in horticulture. The plant on the right was growing with fungi added to the soil, none added to the left. Leeks, the leeks growing on the right had mycorrhizal fungi added to the soil, none to the plants on the left. And I know this is hard to read, but mycorrhizal fungi is added to fields, whatever. And these are some trees growing on the left. It's an outplanting where the fungi were added to the soil, and the trees on the right did not have fungi added to the soil. Or here, trees in containers. The one on the left had fungi added to the soil, but not the one then on the right. So the benefits then of the mycorrhizal fungi are these in nutrition. It takes nutrients then to the plants, especially under low nutrient conditions, and it reduces plant stress, and it promotes then less fertilization. The fungi really are a type of biofertilizer, aren't they? For disease, it protects plants against pathogens, it decreases pesticide use, and it increases plant health. For drought, it takes water to plants, so it increases the drought resistance of plants, and it decreases plant and crop loss. It improves soil, quality of soil by the glomalin that holds aggregates together, and also just the hyphae themselves can hold aggregates of soil together. And plant quality, it increases seedling growth, it promotes plant diversity, and it plays a major role then in the plant community composition. Well, you might be sitting back there and saying, I don't like all this science. Every year I have delicious tomatoes and I have beautiful roses. So why can't I just continue using my synthetic fertilizer? So it does produce large, pretty plants, but we are master gardeners, right? We garden in an eco-savvy manner. So synthetic fertilizer does not supply all the nutrients then that plants need. It does not supply water. It does not increase plant diversity. It does not improve plant survival. It does not decrease root disease. It disfavors soil structure, and it favors weeds. So it's often said that a bag of synthetic fertilizer to a plant is like a bag of potato chips to us, right? It makes you fat, it makes you thirsty, and it does not give you all the nutrients you need. Okay, so what are bad practices? Bad practices then are fertilizing with excess nitrogen and phosphate. Tilling the soil is a bad practice. Using pesticides is a bad practice. Overwatering. If the plant has a lot of water, it doesn't need those fungi that are going to deliver water. The removal of topsoil, erosion, fire, compaction, the invasion of weeds, letting land lie fallow. You shouldn't do that because if there are no plants, you won't have any fungi because they need to be fed by the plants, and fumigation. Some beneficial practices are then to end then on an up note. You should eliminate pesticide use. You should eliminate synthetic fertilizers. You should eliminate tilling. You should increase plant diversity. You should plant a ground cover, add organic matter to your soil, and respect the mycorrhizal fungi. And with that, I thank you and tell you that it all started in Truffles.
Dr. Roy, that was spectacular. Could we start with questions from the audience, and then I'll try to also field questions from the Zoom people as well.
Yes.
If you could repeat the question too, so the Zoom
So if
people
you can buy the mycorrhizal, how do you know which kind to get for what you're trying to grow?
Okay, for us gardeners. Well, today, the ectomycorrhizal fungi can be propagated in the laboratory. And because of the genetic techniques we have today, so many of them have been identified. So we're really fortunate. The endomycorrhizal fungi cannot be propagated in the laboratory, but they are propagated like in greenhouses in plants. So you get some fungi and some soil. In agriculture and arboriculture and horticulture, especially in agriculture, they know what fungi will do best with certain plants. As gardeners, we really cannot be that fussy. You can go to a big box store or a big garden center and buy some kind of a soil amendment. And when you go to these places, just look at the bags and see what it says on the back. And it says ectomycorrhizal fungi. And it lists, a bunch of genera and species, or endomycorrhizal fungi. So that's where we are as gardeners. We can't go out and buy a specific fungus for our string beans. And we're not there yet. But you just have to buy what's available and buy it where you live. We have to realize that not all fungi will grow in all soils. And our soil here in the Mid-Atlantic region is different from the soil in southern Minnesota. So buy what they sell here and use it. Some people say, is it really going to help? And it can't hurt. It can only help. But let me say one more thing, especially as a pathogenic microbiologist. If you choose to buy this, what you should do when you apply it is do what we're accustomed to, and that's wear a mask. Okay. These fungi are not human pathogens, but in high concentrations, potentially, they could maybe cause disease in you. So don't inhale it. Wear a mask, cover your mouth and your nose when you're putting it in the soil. Yes.
So if we have already planted seedlings, and can we go back and topically add or dig some in? Or?
Okay. The question is, if we've already planted seedlings, can we go back now and add? Sure, you can do that. I would put it on the soil, maybe just sort of work it a little bit into the soil. And you can do that. Yes.
If I see those mushrooms in the yard and I go stomp on them, am I stomp on them? Yes.
And she's mushrooms in her yard and she's stomping on them.
Harming the ecology.
Is it harming the ecology? Well, one thing some people do and how you can get those fungi is actually to pick mushrooms and chop them up, because they have all the spores then of the fungus, and then you can distribute those to the area. So I can't really think that you're destroying the whole system. Okay. Yes.
Can you explain how purity rate of mushrooms occurs in a perfect circle?
Oh, how the circle, it's called a fairy ring. Remember that slide I showed you with the filamentous fungus? What happens is that the fungi grow, and after a while, they send up hyphae to produce then the mushrooms. So it's just, it depends on those growing conditions. The fungi will grow out in all different ways. And perhaps it's a matter of the moisture in the soil or the nutrients in the soil. And it's like they stop growing and they send up their mushrooms. So the fairy rings, yes.
I have two questions. So what happens to the mycorrhizal fungi in an area when a plant dies or a tree dies? And my second question is, can they transmit a pathogen directly through the network?
Okay. The first question is what happens when a plant dies?
Yes.
Well, hopefully there are other plants around, the fungi can go to other plants, but fungi don't live forever. I mean, they might die, but our soil has billions of fungal cells. And what was your second question?
Can they directly transmit pathogens?
Can the fungi transmit pathogens to plants?
Yes, to another plant. So in other words, that slide you showed, one of those plants had a fungus pathogen on it, and it transferred through the network. It seemed that they were transferring elements, but can they also transfer pathogens?
No, typically mycorrhizal fungi are not pathogenic. Okay, so it's like two groups of fungi, the pathogens and the mycorrhizal fungi. And so they're different groups of fungi. So no, the mycorrhizal fungi will not be involved in the transmission of pathogens.
There's one question over here
Okay, one more question.
in the back there.
Okay.
I have a question about, I know in the area, if you're buying soil, you have the option to buy like a topsoil or a topsoil compost mix or a sanitized compost mix or a mushroom compost. Is there any benefit? What's the benefit to using maybe a mushroom compost over sanitized compost?
Okay, the difference between sanitized compost and what kind of compost?
Like a
Mushroom.
compost.
Oh, well, the mushroom, if something's been sanitized, then it has most likely been treated to kill certain microorganisms in general in the soil. So I think you're much better off buying a mushroom compost, because that means it hasn't been treated. It'll have the spores then of those mushrooms, and most likely spores and hyphae then of other mycorrhizal fungi as well. So I definitely would buy that.
Dr. Roy, we have a couple of questions here, if you don't mind
Oh, okay.
reading and answering those.
Okay, do this one.
Yes, right here.
Okay. Do fertilizers sold with mycorrhizal fungi additives actually negate the beneficial effects of the fungi, or are the components complementary? Well, I'm really not familiar with those fertilizers. There's a product out there now starting. If you really don't know how to answer that question. I don't think they put synthetic fertilizer in with mycorrhizal fungi. At least they shouldn't do it. I don't think I would buy that.
Here's one right here.
When you transplant fungi from, say, the forest into your garden beds, or can you transplant fungi, say, from the forest into your garden beds? Well, first of all, you shouldn't be digging up anything in the forest in the first place. So can you do it? You have to realize that fungi are fussy, like we're fussy, and they like certain soil types. So the type of soil in the forest might be different from the type of soil in your yard. So in general, that's not a good idea to do that. But if you did it, if you had the right kind of soil, then the fungus should start growing then in your property.
Here's one slash burn method for horticulture.
This one,
Yes.
why has, whoops,
I'm sorry. Gosh,
we lost it.
lost it. Check. Well, here's one right here.
Would you recommend using the biofungicide such as actinovate? The biofungicide. Actinovate. Well, according to everything I've said today, you shouldn't really use a fungicide. A fungicide is an agent that kills fungi. And chemicals don't know the difference between pathogenic fungi and beneficial fungi. So we really should not be using fungicides. So I would not recommend using that.
And then this one right here.
Is the fungi in the soil and organic matter pretty much wiped out of the ecosystem when development clear cuts all vegetation and scrapes off the topsoil, yes, and then builds a subdivision, a school, a mall, a business complex? Isn't our predominant way of construction creating sterile communities that are killing and are wiping out the majority of the fungi that used to be there? That's exactly right. I mean, that's what happens. So I mean, in a situation like that, it would be a good idea to try to replenish the soil with fungi. So that's what people should do, refinish it with topsoil and purchase fungi to start replicating in that topsoil, plant some plants, and start your plant community.
Okay. I think we've tortured Dr. Royd up here enough. We really appreciate you presenting and fielding all of those questions. You've been a wonderful guest for us. So thank you so much.